Close your eyes for a second. Imagine everything you've been taught about the universe, about your own mind, about what is real and what is, well, mystical. Now, imagine all of that being just incomplete. What if the paranormal isn't some separate, spooky realm, but simply physics we haven't bothered to explore yet? What if the human spirit isn't some abstract, ineffable thing, but is actually made of electromagnetism?
It sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? But the material we're diving into today proposes that this isn't fiction at all. It's a radical new scientific perspective.
And it challenges everything.
Yeah.
We're talking about a proposed new science, Colin A. Ross's human energy fields model, that aims to bridge the seemingly vast chasm between science and what has traditionally been called spirit. The idea that the human spirit could literally be the electromagnetic field generated by your body.
That's the core premise. It suggests that ancient wisdom, talking about things like auras, chakras, and chi energy, wasn't just making stuff up.
Right.
It might have been describing physical reality that our modern scientific tools have been maybe just too blunt to perceive.
We've got a stack of sources here that don't just propose a theory. They propose actual experiments, actual applications, things that could turn our understanding of health, consciousness, and even life itself completely upside down.
Yeah, it's pretty out there.
It's a confrontation with centuries of scientific dogma, a true paradigm shift.
It's a thrilling narrative, really. The story of science potentially catching up to and perhaps validating human experience and traditional knowledge in ways we never thought possible.
It absolutely is. It feels like we're on the cusp of something truly mind-blowing. And this deep dive is your shortcut to understanding what's happening. Before we plunge into this incredible journey together, do us a solid. Please like this deep dive, hit that subscribe button, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any of our future explorations into the deepest questions. Okay, so let's dive right in. Forget everything you thought you knew about the separation between mind and body or science and spirit. The foundational idea here is simple but revolutionary. Spirit is not separate. It's a fundamental property of matter, like mass or charge.
That's the starting gun. The material we have argues that the human spirit specifically is the electromagnetic field of the human body.
Okay.
This stands in direct opposition to a cornerstone of Western thought for centuries, Cartesian dualism.
Right, Descartes, who famously separated the thinking stuff, mind, spirit, from the extended stuff, matter, body.
Exactly.
Modern science largely inherited this split, even as it focused solely on the extended stuff. It tried to explain everything by breaking matter down, reducing it to its smallest components, assuming spirit or mind wasn't part of that equation.
Exactly. And the critique in our sources is that this foundational split, even when scientists claim to be pure materialists, creates deep logical problems within the conventional Western scientific view.
Logical problems?
Yeah.
Like what? If science says only matter exists but ignores spirit, what does that break?
Well, think about the distinction between animate and inanimate matter. Rocks versus rabbits, right? Conventional science reduces both to atoms and fundamental forces governed by physics. But if there's no such thing as a life force allowed in the system, how can atoms organized one way, like a rock, be inert, and atoms organized another way, like a rabbit, be vibrantly, self-directingly alive?
Yeah.
Logically, if the fundamental components are inanimate, the whole thing should be inanimate. It doesn't quite compute.
So either nothing is truly alive, or life or spirit is a property that exists at a more fundamental level than reductionist science allows for. Is that the idea?
Precisely. Another issue they raise is the concept of the origin of life happening, say, 1 billion years ago.
Right, the primordial soup idea.
Yeah, the idea that at some point, non-living chemicals suddenly self-organized and became living, replicating organisms. But if atoms were dead before, how could they spontaneously generate life? It's the same logical hurdle. You can't really get something fundamentally new like life or mind by just adding more of the old dead components together. 0 times 1 billion is still 0.
It reminds me of that phrase, you can't get blood from a stone, or in this case, you can't get life from dead atoms, or mind from mindless ones, which leads to the mind-body problem itself.
Exactly. How does the subjective experience of mind, feeling like something, arise from purely physical, supposedly mindless neurons and atoms in the brain?
Right.
Conventional science often calls this an emergent property, the idea that complexity gives rise to new qualities.
Yeah, I've heard that.
But the sources here argue that terms like emergent property, when applied to consciousness function, much like outdated concepts in science, like phlogiston.
How so?
Well, they're words that describe an observation, but they don't offer a real physical mechanism or explanation within the existing framework. It's like saying mind emerges, but you can't actually find mind in the fundamental physics, so where did it come from?
Okay.
It looks suspiciously like sneaking Descartes' rational soul back under a different, more technical-sounding name. A word, not a thing.
So conventional science claims to have thrown out spirit, but then uses terms that act as placeholders for it when trying to explain consciousness or life.
That's the critique, yeah. And the proposed solution is elegant in its simplicity, if, challenging to our ingrained worldview. Reject dualism entirely.
Okay.
Embrace a philosophy of unity. Spirit is a general property of matter. The universe didn't suddenly gain life or mind billions of years ago. Those qualities, in their simplest forms, have been inherent properties of matter since the beginning.
Wow.
In this view, there's nothing separate to reduce. You go from spirit through biology, chemistry, physics, down to quantum mechanics, and you find spirit again. It's a circle, not an arrow pointing only downwards to inanimate parts.
Okay, so if spirit is a general property of matter, and the human spirit is specifically the body's electromagnetic field, why EM? Why not gravity or the nuclear forces? There are 4 fundamental forces, right?
Right. Gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear forces. The argument hinges on what our primary tools for scientifically studying consciousness actually measure.
Okay, what registers when someone is awake, asleep, dreaming, or even brain dead? The electroencephalogram, the EEG.
Which measures electrical activity in the brain, electromagnetic fields. Okay, I see where you're going.
Precisely. When we look for a physical correlate to conscious states, the main thing we measure is EM fields. The sources argue this is a pretty strong indicator.
So it's like, follow the data.
Kind of, yeah. If mind reduces to biology, biology to chemistry, chemistry to physics, and physics includes those 4 fundamental forces, then the force most directly linked to our current scientific measure of consciousness is electromagnetism.
So it's not that a rock has complex thoughts, obviously, but that the configuration of matter energy that constitutes its spirit or EM field is just vastly simpler than ours.
Exactly. The potential for complexity exists in the EM field, and in complex systems like a human brain and body, that potential is realized in incredibly intricate ways that we perceive as consciousness.
And we know basic things about EM fields, right? They travel through stuff, they can be insulated, like radio waves. Think radio waves going right through walls or an EKG measuring your heart's electrical activity right through your chest. EM fields permeate materials.
But they can also be blocked.
Right. This is why sensitive measurements often need shielded rooms to filter out all the background EM noise from, lights, equipment, the city.
And we know EM fields affect biology. I mean, a bolt of lightning is a pretty dramatic example.
Definitely dramatic. But the debate is usually about weak fields, right? Can truly subtle EM signals have biological effects?
Yeah, that's where I usually hear the skepticism.
That's where the skepticism usually lies. The argument is often that the inherent noise in biological systems, all the random thermal motion and chemical reactions, should overwhelm any weak external fields.
Makes sense.
But the sources counter with examples conventional science already accepts. Think about plants capturing photons for photosynthesis.
Light. Yeah, light is an electromagnetic field.
Exactly. That's a very weak signal initiating complex biological processes. And we have federal safety standards for EM exposure precisely because even non-ionizing fields, fields that don't knock electrons off atoms, do have measurable biological effects at certain intensities.
Okay.
And think about solar flares messing with cell phone reception or even power grids. That's interaction happening at a fundamental, even quantum mechanical level between cosmic EM events and our technology.
Which brings us to something we often take for granted. We evolved not in empty space, but within the Earth's own massive electromagnetic field, its magnetosphere.
Absolutely. The material suggests this isn't just benign background noise. It's an integral part of our environment, like the air we breathe or the water we drink. We've interacted with it constantly for millions of years.
Yeah, and the idea is that our modern lives spent indoors in insulated buildings, wearing rubber-soled shoes on concrete, surrounded by urban environments humming with artificial EM noise, is creating a fundamental disconnection.
That's the argument, a disconnection from this natural field we co-evolved with.
A disconnection that could be affecting our health and well-being in ways we haven't fully recognized, like subtly.
Yes, it's framed as an anthropological, physiological, and even a public health issue. This disconnection isn't just a feeling, It's presented as a physical state with potential biological consequences.
Hmm.
Think about the vitamin D deficiency epidemic that's widely recognized now.
Right, because people don't get enough sun.
Exactly. It's essentially a scientifically validated EM field deficiency epidemic. Lack of exposure to specific EM radiation, sunlight, leads to a lack of vitamin D synthesis in the skin, which affects health right down to the genetic level.
That's a really powerful analogy.
It's a concrete example supporting the idea that interaction with other parts of the natural EM spectrum, like the Earth's field, might also be vital, and disconnection could be harmful in ways we don't yet measure.
Like astronauts experiencing bone loss, an extreme case of being disconnected from Earth's gravity and its EM field.
Right. It lends a kind of scientific weight to the idea that being rooted or grounded or connected to the Earth, while traditionally expressed in metaphorical terms like Earth Mother, might have a literal physical basis in interacting with the planet's EM field.
So if we evolved bathed in these EM fields, and we measure our own brain activity with EM, the idea that humans are biological cell phones, sending and receiving complex EM signals, starts to sound less like sci-fi.
And more like a testable hypothesis. That's the proposed mechanism. Our bodies aren't just inert lumps of matter. They're dynamic, complex EM systems interacting constantly with the world via fields.
And this wasn't just noise. It might have been selected for.
The sources suggest this ability wasn't just background noise, but could have been actively selected for during evolution. Imagine a predator or prey that could sense the faint EM footprint of another organism, maybe its heartbeat or nervous system activity.
That would be a huge survival advantage.
A clear survival advantage, yeah. That capability could be refined over evolutionary time. Sensing game, sensing danger, maybe even sensing subtle environmental shifts through EM changes.
Like an ancient biological network sensing energy and intent before we even had language.
Precisely. If a technological cell phone can process incredibly weak, digitized EM signals into discernible information like a voice or text message, why couldn't an evolved biological system like the nervous system, or maybe specific organs, process complex analog EM signals from the environment or from other organisms?
Which organs?
The solar plexus, for example, is mentioned as a potential biological EM communication hub, a sort of gut-feeling antenna, maybe sensing not just internal states, but external environmental fields and perhaps the fields of others.
Okay, this moves us from philosophy and mechanism to actual evidence and testable science. This is where it gets really exciting.
Right.
This proposed new science isn't just theory. It includes specific experiments designed to validate these claims.
And the first one discussed is utterly fascinating because it takes something dismissed as historical superstition and suggests it's actually real, the human eyebeam.
The eyebeam. You mean the idea that something physically leaves your eyes when you see, like in ancient theories of vision, before we've decided that, light enters the eye.
Exactly that, known historically as extramission. It was the prevailing view for centuries, and it got tangled up with beliefs like the evil eye, the idea that a powerful gaze could exert influence, maybe even cause harm.
Yeah, modern science threw that out completely in favor of intramission. Light comes in, nothing goes out.
Right. But the sources suggest those old evil eye beliefs might contain a kernel of truth. Remember the sense of being stared at?
Oh yeah, everyone knows that feeling. The hairs on the back of your neck.
It's a common subjective experience. Within this new framework, it becomes a testable hypothesis. Maybe we can sense an EM signal emanating from someone looking directly at us.
So the experiment was designed to see if they could actually detect this supposed eyebeam. How would you even do that?
They used highly sensitive, high-impedance electrodes. These aren't your standard off-the-shelf EEG electrodes. They're specifically designed to pick up extremely weak electrical signals without being easily swamped by surrounding electrical noise or the electrode's own interaction with the skin.
Okay, specialized gear.
Very specialized. They hooked these up to sophisticated EEG amplification and recording equipment. The real kicker was the placement. They put a special electrode in front of the eye, specifically mounted on the inside of a goggle lens about 2 centimeters away from the cornea.
Not touching the eye, but right in front of it.
Exactly. While the subject also had standard electrodes on their scalp, like FP2, which is near the forehead above the eye, and a free-hanging reference electrode, FPZZ, also in front but not aimed at the eye, to act as controls. All done inside an electromagnetically shielded environment to minimize external interference.
So trying to catch a signal right at the source as it leaves the eye and compare it to the general brain activity and background noise. What did they find? Did they find anything?
The results reported are pretty compelling. They detected a measurable electromagnetic signal coming from the direction of the eyes.
A real signal.
A real measurable signal. And crucially, this signal wasn't just noise or simple bleed-through from the brain's general electrical activity. In specific frequency ranges, particularly delta, beta, and gamma when the eyes were open, and alpha and beta when eyes were closed, the signal detected by the electrode in front of the eye had a greater amplitude, was measurably stronger, than the general EM field measured through the skull at the FP2 site at the same time.
Wait, hang on. Stronger coming out the eye than the overall brain field coming through the bone nearby. That sounds significant.
It is very significant if confirmed, and the signal apparently showed specific physiological reactivity that distinguished it further. For example, it exhibited something called reversed alpha blocking.
Reverse alpha blocking. What's that?
Okay, so standard alpha waves measured on an EEG typically increase in amplitude when you close your eyes and relax, and they decrease when you open your eyes and focus visually. That decrease is called alpha blocking.
Right, I know that.
The Eyebeam signal's alpha and delta frequency components reportedly did the opposite. Their amplitude actually increased when the subject's eyes were open.
Whoa. That's the opposite of the brain's typical alpha pattern.
Exactly. This distinct pattern, along with the higher amplitude at the source, suggests it's not just some artifact of brainwaves. It's argued to be a physiologically active, distinct signal emanating from the region of the eye itself.
So this experiment, using specialized tools and careful methodology, has demonstrated that human ocular extramission is a real, measurable scientific fact.
According to the author and the results presented in the source material, yes, it provides a scientifically specified potential mechanism for that subjective experience of the sense of being stared at. And it suggests those old evil eye beliefs, while maybe exaggerated or misinterpreted, or perhaps tapping into a real physical phenomenon. It takes something completely dismissed as superstition and attempts to plant it firmly in the realm of empirical, measurable science.
That's genuinely mind-bending. It could completely reframe something we thought was settled history, settled science. But, okay, detecting a signal is one thing. What does it mean? Is it just a byproduct of seeing, or does it actually do something?
That's the million-dollar question, right? That's the crucial next step for research proposed in the sources. Demonstrating existence is foundational, step one.
Right.
Now the questions are, does this Eyebeam carry information? Is it modulated by thought or intention? Can it influence things outside the body, even subtly? Could it be used for communication, maybe consciously, maybe even subliminally between people?
Could someone, train themselves to focus this EM field from their eyes and interact with external objects, maybe like a specially designed EM-sensitive switch or something?
That's exactly the kind of future research direction hinted at. Could focused intention modulate this beam measurably? The potential applications for probing human interaction, hidden capabilities, even consciousness itself are just immense if this holds up.
And the underlying idea here isn't that this EM activity is limited just to the brain or the eyes, right? It's a whole body phenomenon.
Precisely. If spirit is seen as a general property of matter and it's tied specifically to the EM field in biological systems, then wherever there is living matter in the body, there should be associated EM activity contributing to the overall field. The brain is obviously a major, highly complex node, but the field is distributed throughout the entire organism.
And we mentioned detecting fields remotely earlier. Is there actually solid evidence of that already happening, beyond the Eyebeam experiment?
Yes, absolutely. This isn't purely hypothetical anymore. Electrical engineers, for instance, working in fields like medical device development, have already demonstrated that they can remotely detect human heart and brain EM fields.
Remotely? How far away?
Using these high-impedance electrodes and sophisticated signal processing, they've reported picking up clear signals from the heart's electrical activity, like an EKG without touching the body, and even the brain's slower rhythms, like EEG, up to 3 feet or about a meter away from the body.
3 feet away?
Yeah.
Just the body's natural field without any contact?
In a carefully shielded environment to cut down external noise, yes. And the physics behind this is important. For very low-frequency EM signals, like the delta, theta, alpha waves in brain activity, roughly 1 to 60 hertz the inverse square law.
The rule that says signal strength drops off super fast with distance.
Exactly. That law doesn't apply in the same way over relatively shorter distances for these very long wavelengths. These low-frequency signals can actually propagate quite effectively through the air, theoretically even up to significant distances like 1,000 kilometers, with much less drop-off than higher frequency signals.
1,000 kilometers. Wow.
That's the physics of low-frequency propagation. So the idea that our body's EM fields are strictly contained within our skin just isn't physically accurate for these important biological frequencies. They do extend outward.
This all leads to the truly revolutionary proposed technology that underpins much of this new science. The whole body electromagnetic scanner.
Right.
First, just to get a sense of scale for the electromagnetic fields we're talking about, they provide some reference points from one of the sources.
Give me the numbers.
Okay, so magnetic field strength is measured in Tesla. A typical hairdryer, held close, might generate a field around 10 to the power of -3 Tesla, or 1 millitesla.
Okay, hairdryer, 10 to 3T.
The Earth's natural magnetic field, the one compasses respond to, is considerably weaker, around 10 to 4T.
10 times weaker than the hairdryer.
Yep. Then you have the general electromagnetic noise in a typical urban environment, from power lines, wiring, appliances, radio signals. That's weaker still, maybe around 10-6T.
Okay, a millionth of a Tesla.
And then, way down at the bottom, you have the magnetic field generated by the electrical activity of the human brain itself, measured just outside the scalp. That's incredibly faint, estimated around 10-12 Tesla.
10 to the -12, that's a million times weaker than the urban noise and a billion times weaker than a hairdryer.
Exactly, which highlights the challenge. If the brain's own magnetic field is that weak, how could it possibly be significant, especially when drowned out by environmental noise? And how could we even measure it accurately?
Which connects back to the cell phone analogy. Maybe it's not about raw strength, but specific patterns or frequencies, and the need for extreme shielding, like in that magnetoreception experiment we'll talk about later.
Precisely. It also explains why most medical measurements focus on electrical fields or potentials within the body, using contact electrodes like EEG for the brain or EKG for the heart. Those electrical signals are much stronger and easier to pick up directly. Measuring the external magnetic fields without contact requires much more sensitive detectors.
Okay, so imagine something maybe physically resembling an MRI machine, a large cylinder, but instead of using powerful magnets and radio waves to generate static images of your anatomy, this scanner, using arrays of non-contact high-impedance electrodes positioned all around the body within a heavily shielded room, could potentially map the dynamic real-time electromagnetic field of your entire body, your living, breathing, feeling, thinking, EM signature, changing moment by moment.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown.
Yeah.
Forget just the brain waves or the Eyebeam. Mapping the spirit as a dynamic EM field. What could you possibly do with a scanner like that? The sources list a huge, almost overwhelming range of potential applications.
This is where the potential to unify different fields of knowledge really shines. In medicine, for example, it suggests that something like a heart attack isn't just a localized plumbing problem in a single organ, but might be better understood as a whole-body EM event, a catastrophic disruption of the body's overall field. The scanner could potentially detect subtle pre-cardiac EM distress patterns before a heart attack actually occurs.
Predicting a heart attack based on its EM signature, that would be absolutely massive.
Massive. And you could extend that. Looking at the full spectrum of bodily EM activity, maybe studying the continuum from major epileptic seizures down to subtle muscle twitches or tremors.
Could it find things missed by current tools?
Potentially. It might even be able to identify epileptic foci, the starting points of seizures located outside the brain in some cases, maybe in the gut or elsewhere, supporting this idea of constant two-way EM communication and influence between the brain and the rest of the body.
Wow. How about in psychiatric health? So many disorders are still primarily seen as just brain chemistry problems.
This science proposes a radical shift. Many psychiatric conditions could be viewed as whole-body EM disorders, not just localized brain diseases. Mania and depression, for instance, might have distinctly measurable whole-body EM signatures.
How so?
Perhaps a manic field is characterized by high-amplitude erratic frequencies radiating strongly outward, while a depressed field might be contracted, low-amplitude, stagnant, or show specific distorted patterns. The scanner could potentially visualize these states.
And even find specific points of trouble.
Maybe. It could potentially pinpoint psychiatric foci elsewhere in the body, say, an area of chronic tension in the shoulders corresponding to anxiety, or a feeling of stuckness or anger in the gut linked to depression, going beyond just looking at brain activity maps.
So treatment could then involve addressing the whole body's EM state, not just prescribing meds aimed at brain chemistry.
That's a key implication. If migraines or certain types of epilepsy are rooted in aberrant EM patterns, could therapies directly targeting the EM field, like specialized EM helmets generating counterfrequencies, be effective?
Or even things like meditation or psychotherapy.
Yes. Could the scanner provide objective feedback showing how practices like meditation or even successful psychotherapy actually change and reharmonize the body's overall EM field? It connects the psychological state directly to a measurable physical field.
This feels like it's really bridging the gap between conventional Western medicine and other healing traditions that talk about energy.
Absolutely. It offers a potential objective physical basis for phenomena central to practices like traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine. Think about acupuncture.
Often dismissed because the meridians don't map to nerves or blood vessels.
Right. It's often dismissed by conventional science, partly because of its non-EM theoretical language, talking about qi flowing through meridians. But this HEF science suggests qi might be the measurable dynamic electromagnetic field of the body, and meridians might correspond to pathways of higher EM conductivity or flow.
So the scanner could test that.
Potentially, yes. The scanner could visualize the body's EM field and maybe show how acupuncture needles interact with it, perhaps altering field strength or flow at specific points, potentially validating these ancient practices in modern scientific terms.
And the same logic could apply to things like therapeutic touch or Reiki or even chiropractic adjustments, measuring their impact on the body's EM distribution.
Exactly.
Are these practices causing measurable shifts in the body's electromagnetic field that correlate with therapeutic benefits?
The scanner could provide the objective data. It takes the subjective perception of energy flow or blockages and places it within a physical framework that can, in principle, be studied with instrumentation.
So the aura that some people claim to see could be related to the extent and quality of this EM field. And chakras might be specific nodes or concentrations of EM activity.
That's the proposal, not as ethereal, mystical concepts, but as specific, measurable configurations, amplitudes, and frequencies within the body's overall EM field. The scanner could potentially map these features objectively.
This could provide objective data for things that have been seen as purely subjective for millennia. Like the sources mention the subjective experience of profound physical training, say marathon running.
Yes, the snow runner experience.
Right, described as feeling a reorganization and integration of the runner's EM field, maybe even synchronizing with the Earth's field.
That becomes a testable prediction. Could the scanner measure changes in the body's EM field, coherence, strength, or even frequency patterns after intense endurance training? Could it show increased alignment or resonance with the local geomagnetic field?
And then there are the more, shall we say, out there or paranormal potential applications. Could the scanner shed light on those controversial areas?
The sources definitely propose it could. The moment of death, for instance, is described as a potentially significant EM event, the light of the body fading out, the soul, conceived as the body's organizing EM field, potentially detaching or dissipating.
So could it address the question of survival after death?
Well, it frames the question scientifically. If some organized EM entity does survive bodily death, it must, by definition, have an EM signature. Detecting such a signature would be an immense challenge for physics and instrumentation, requiring incredible sensitivity. But the scanner conceptually opens the door to investigating it empirically, rather than leaving it solely to faith or philosophy.
What about things like astral projection or remote viewing? People report experiences of their consciousness being outside their body.
If those phenomena involve some kind of temporary soul disconnection or a projection of awareness associated with the EM field, the scanner could potentially measure changes in the body's EM field during these reported states. Is there a decrease in field strength? A change in coherence? It offers a way to study these experiences scientifically, looking for physical correlates rather than just dismissing them outright based on current paradigms.
Okay, and what about something like dissociative identity disorder, DID? That's often fiercely debated between trauma-based models and socio-cognitive models.
DID is presented in the sources as a potential natural laboratory for setting distinct psychophysiological states within a single human body.
How so?
The trauma model generally predicts that different alter personalities, formed in response to overwhelming experiences, have unique physiological profiles, different heart rates, brainwave patterns, hormonal levels, even different responses to medication, reflecting their distinct self-states.
Right.
This new science predicts they would also have distinct whole-body EM signatures. The scanner could potentially differentiate the EM field of different alters. Maybe one alter presents an EM signature resembling a frightened child, while another shows the pattern of an angry adolescent or a calm adult.
Wow, so it could provide objective, physical evidence for the distinctness of alters, supporting the trauma model over purely social explanations.
That's a very powerful, testable prediction derived from the theory, yes. It could provide crucial objective data in a highly controversial and often misunderstood area.
That's incredible.
And you could also use it to study how environmental cues or triggers instantly switch these states. Like someone with panic disorder suddenly feeling intense fear in an elevator, could the scanner capture the rapid shift in their whole body EM field as that state takes over? This applies to understanding triggers in many disorders.
And could it even look at the mechanism of psychotherapy itself? We know therapy can lead to brain changes, but how does talking or emotional processing actually do that physically?
The proposal is that psychotherapy, when effective, initiates subtle but significant changes first in the brain-mind field and the body's overall EM field. These EM shifts could then trickle down to the biological level.
How?
By influencing things like gene expression, turning certain genes on or off protein synthesis, and the release of nerve growth factors. This could facilitate actual physical repair, like potentially measurable hippocampal recovery in trauma survivors undergoing therapy. The scanner could, in theory, track these subtle EM shifts as therapy progresses, providing a new window into how psychological healing manifests physically.
So it's not just about diagnosing or seeing problems, but about understanding the fundamental process of healing and change, even at a physical level that's influenced by our psychology and experiences.
Exactly. It reframes psychological states, spiritual practices, trauma, and healing as having tangible, measurable physical correlates in the body's dynamic electromagnetic field. It aims to unify mind and body in a way that's scientifically investigable.
Now let's address something that almost inevitably comes up when you start talking about consciousness, reality, and physics in the same breath. Quantum mechanics?
Ah, yes, QM.
QM can get notoriously weird, and sometimes people, maybe inspired by films like What the Bleep Do We Know, use quantum concepts to support ideas that sound, well, frankly, pretty dualistic or overtly mystical.
Yes, there's definitely a tendency in some circles to leap from the strangeness of quantum phenomena like wave-particle duality, superposition, entanglement, the observer effect, to conclusions about consciousness directly interacting with matter, creating reality through observation, or proving free will somehow overrides physical laws.
And the sources we're discussing here are, let's say, cautious about those particular interpretations.
Cautious is putting it mildly. They're highly skeptical. The author argues that these popular interpretations often fall back into subtle logical flaws and implicitly reintroduce a kind of dualism.
How so?
By positing a consciousness or an observer that exists somehow separate from or outside of the physical quantum system it's observing or influencing. The argument in our source material is that the HEF science, the science of the human spirit as the EM field, does not require these kinds of philosophical interpretations of QM to be valid. It stands on its own proposed physical basis.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's look at the famous two-slit experiment through this critical lens. You shoot particles, like photons or electrons, at a screen with two narrow slits in it.
Right.
If you don't try to detect which slit the particle goes through, you get an interference pattern on the detector screen behind the slits, as if each particle acted like a wave passing through both slits and interfering with itself.
Correct, the classic wave behavior.
But if you place detectors at the slits to see which slit each particle goes through, the interference pattern disappears, and the particles behave like tiny bullets going through one slit or the other.
Exactly. Classic particle behavior. This wave-particle duality and the apparent role of measurement or observation is the core quantum enigma.
And the standard interpretation often involves ideas like the particle somehow knowing it's being watched, or being in a superposition of states, going through both slits, until the measurement collapses its wave function into a definite state, going through one slit.
Yeah.
Some even add that the observer's consciousness is what triggers the collapse.
Right. Those are the interpretations that feel incredibly counterintuitive and lead to those consciousness creates reality ideas.
And the author here challenges these.
Yes, by asking simpler, more logically grounded questions. For example, why must we assume the interference happens at the slits? Why can't the wave nature manifest over the whole path, with the interference pattern forming simply where waves constructively and destructively interfere at the final detector screen? Why can't we make statements about the particle's definite properties, like its position, between observations if QM is a complete description? Does observation truly cause the particle's state to materialize out of nowhere, or does it simply reveal which path it actually took, a path that was definite all along but unknown to us?
And the idea of detecting it at slit 2.
His argument is straightforward. If you put a detector at slit 2 and it fires, the simplest logical conclusion is that the particle went through slit 2. Why assume it also somehow went through slit 1 and then retroactively decided not to when detected? He argues that detecting it at slit 2 is effectively the same as closing slit 1 for that particle. It removes that path from possibility. No need for spooky action or the particle having psychic powers.
So his proposed location for the wave function collapse, if we must talk about it happening in physical space.
The detector panel itself, where the interaction actually occurs and the particle's energy is deposited, creating a measurable event. He basically argues that the mathematical formalism of QM is incredibly successful at predicting outcomes. But the philosophical interpretations layered on top often introduce unnecessary complexity and logical paradoxes, especially those that sneak dualism back in.
Okay, how about quantum entanglement? That's another big one. Two particles are linked, maybe created together, so that measuring a property of one instantly tells you the corresponding property of the other, no matter how far apart they are.
The spooky action at a distance that Einstein famously disliked.
Right. And some link this to consciousness affecting reality, maybe the physicist's decision on what to measure on one particle instantaneously influencing the state of the distant one.
Again, the author argues this interpretation is logically flawed and unnecessary. He uses a simple classical analogy to illustrate the point.
The twins analogy.
Exactly. Imagine identical twin boys starting at a median strip in the middle of a wide road and walking off in opposite directions towards the sidewalks. You don't know they're twins initially. When one reaches the sidewalk, someone there checks and shouts, "It's a boy!"
Right.
You instantly know the one who reached the other sidewalk is also a boy. Did the measurement on the first twin instantaneously cause the second twin to become a boy? Did information travel faster than light across the road?
No, of course not. Because they were created as identical twins, their genders were correlated from the very beginning.
Precisely. The correlation was built in from the start. The measurement just revealed the pre-existing correlated state. The author argues that applying the same straightforward logic to entangled particles, that their correlated properties were determined when they were created or interacted, dissolves the spookiness and removes the need to invoke faster-than-light influences or consciousness interaction.
It makes the correlation seem much less mysterious. And Schrödinger's cat. The poor cat in the box that's supposedly both alive and dead until someone opens the box and collapses its state.
The author makes the crucial point that Schrödinger himself intended this thought experiment not to illustrate the reality of quantum superposition in the everyday world, but to show the absurdity of applying the QM formalism developed for microscopic particles directly to large macroscopic objects like cats.
So it was a critique, not an example.
Exactly. The author argues the cat inside the box is, according to the standard laws of physics and biology operating inside, 100% definitely alive, or 100% definitely dead, based on whether the radioactive atom decayed and triggered the poison release. Its state is definite before any external observer opens the box.
You could put a camera in the box.
Right. Placing a camera or any detector inside would record the definite outcome, alive or dead, without requiring a conscious human observer to collapse anything. The cat is not in a superposition of states just because we, the observers outside, happen to be ignorant of its actual state. Our lack of knowledge doesn't change the cat's reality.
So the big takeaway here regarding QM is that this new science of human energy fields, this HEF theory, it doesn't rely on or need to endorse those particular philosophical, sometimes mystical sounding interpretations of quantum mechanics.
Exactly. So consciousness isn't some mystical force interacting with quantum particles from outside. It is the quantum-based energy field generated by the physical system itself.
That seems to be the essence of their position. And they circle back to the placebo effect as a prime example of something this framework handles better than dualism.
How so?
The placebo effect, where belief, expectation, or meaning can cause real, measurable physiological changes in the body, is a powerful demonstration of mind-body interaction. Dualism struggles to explain how non-physical belief can influence physical chemistry. But if mind-spirit is the body's EM field, which is intimately interwoven with its biochemistry, then it's much less mysterious how changes in the mind, the overall field pattern, could influence the body, the underlying physical processes. They're two aspects of the same system.
Okay, it offers a potentially more unified explanation for things we observe but struggle to fit into the old model. And this philosophical divide, this Cartesian legacy, isn't just academic, is it? The source argues it creates real-world barriers.
Absolutely. They talk about a sociology of dualism that actively hinders progress.
What does that mean?
It means scientists are often wary, even afraid, to investigate topics like energy fields, consciousness, or spiritual experiences, because these areas are tainted by association with metaphysics or pseudoscience, potentially damaging their careers or funding prospects. They stick to safely material topics.
Well, on the other side.
People who have profound subjective experiences, or practitioners working with concepts like energy healing or subtle bodies, often view conventional science as cold, mechanistic, and fundamentally limited, because it seems to ignore or deny the reality of their experiences, focusing only on dead matter.
So you get two camps shouting across a chasm, unable to engage meaningfully.
Pretty much. It prevents potentially fruitful dialogue and collaboration. Western science and various traditional or alternative views that emphasize energy or consciousness remain largely separate, unable to inform or enrich each other, even if they might be describing aspects of the same reality using different languages.
So this whole philosophical reframing spirit as a measurable EM property of matter isn't just navel-gazing. It's presented as the necessary conceptual groundwork for building a whole new kind of science, one that can finally bridge that gap.
That's exactly the ambition. To create a scientific framework that takes spirit and energy fields seriously, not as fuzzy metaphors, but as potentially measurable, physically real phenomena.
It's grounded firmly in the proposed philosophy of unity, that spirit is an inherent property of matter, and the human spirit is specifically the body's electromagnetic field. Now, is that EM field ultimately governed by quantum mechanical laws? Of course, because all physics at the fundamental level is quantum mechanical. Biology reduces to chemistry, which reduces to physics, which reduces to QM. So the HEF is quantum mechanical in nature. But you don't need to invoke consciousness, collapsing wave functions, or spooky action at a distance to make the HEF theory work. The validity of the HEF theory, its core claim that the human spirit is the measurable EM field of the body, is presented as an empirical question.
Testable.
Testable. It's tested by experiments like the ocular extramission detection and potentially in great detail by the proposed whole-body EM scanner. It either holds up to measurement or it doesn't, largely independently of these deep, ongoing philosophical debates about the ultimate meaning of quantum mechanics.
It's fascinating how he consistently brings it back to fundamental logic and empirical testability, even when wading to waters as strange and interpretation-laden as quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
He's essentially saying, let's not get lost in philosophical rabbit holes that might be based on flawed logic. Let's design and perform the experiments to see what's actually there.
It's a call for intellectual rigor, really, and a reminder that just because quantum mechanics is complex and counterintuitive doesn't mean we should throw out basic logical reasoning or jump to explanations that feel suspiciously like dualism wearing a fancy quantum coat. The focus is on building a testable, physical model based on unity.
Okay, stepping back from the individual human body and its field, and even from QM interpretations, this whole perspective has implications for something much broader. Something we rarely think about in these terms. Our electromagnetic environment as a critical factor in public health.
Absolutely. If our own EM field is integral to our physical functioning and even our spiritual or psychological well-being, as the theory proposes, then the electromagnetic environment we're constantly immersed in becomes incredibly important.
And you mentioned EM pollution earlier, from urban life, technology.
Yes. The sources raise serious questions about the potential effects of the pervasive artificial electromagnetic noise we now live in, from power lines, Wi-Fi routers, cell towers, all our myriad devices on our physical and, importantly, our spiritual health, using spiritual here in the sense of the body's fundamental EM field integrity.
Mainstream science often dismisses concerns about weak, non-ionizing fields, right? Saying there's no proven harm mechanism like DNA damage from ionizing radiation.
Correct. The focus is usually on thermal effects, heating tissue, or ionization. But within the HEF framework, the concern isn't necessarily about those gross effects. It's about the potential subtle, chronic impact of this constant, unnatural EM noise on the body's own delicate, information-rich electromagnetic field. Could it be disrupting its natural patterns, its coherence, its communication pathways? And could that disruption have downstream biological and psychological effects over time?
It's a different kind of potential harm mechanism.
Exactly. And layered on top of that is the issue of disconnection from the Earth's natural electromagnetic field.
Right, being indoors all the time, insulated shoes, concrete jungles.
A huge part of modern life for many people. Living and working indoors, often in steel-framed buildings, wearing synthetic materials and rubber-soled shoes, it effectively insulates us from the subtle but pervasive geomagnetic field we evolved alongside for millions of years. This isn't presented as just some abstract back-to-nature concept. It's framed as a real, potentially measurable anthropological and physiological problem.
With public health consequences.
With potential public health consequences affecting perhaps our sense of rootedness, our sleep patterns, our overall vitality and well-being in ways we haven't systematically studied because we haven't had the framework to consider the EM field itself as crucial to health.
It circles back powerfully to that vitamin D example you gave earlier.
It really does. It's the prime analogy used in the sources. We have a scientifically proven widespread health crisis, the vitamin D deficiency epidemic caused directly by insufficient exposure to a specific part of the natural electromagnetic spectrum, namely sunlight.
And it has measurable consequences affecting bones, immune function, mood, even gene expression.
Exactly. If disconnection from that part of the EM spectrum causes such significant measurable health problems, the question naturally arises. What might be the long-term health impacts of chronic disconnection from or disruption of other natural fields like the Earth's main EM field, or constant immersion in artificial EM noise? The astronaut example of accelerated bone loss and other health issues due to disconnection from both gravity and the Earth's EM environment serves as an extreme case study reinforcing the potential importance of these connections.
So the common intuition or folk wisdom that being out in nature, walking barefoot on the grass, or spending time away from the city is good for you, it might have a concrete scientific basis, not just in fresh air, exercise, or stress reduction, but in literally reconnecting our body's electromagnetic system with the Earth's vital natural field.
That's precisely the implication. The science of HEF offers a potential physical explanation for the perceived benefits of these practices and our deep-seated feeling of connection to the natural world. It even raises the possibility that certain sacred sites or healing places known across cultures might not just be due to placebo or psychological factors, but could possess unique local geomagnetic fields or telluric currents that actively resonate with and benefit the human EM system in measurable ways.
Which brings us beautifully full circle back to the grand vision articulated in these sources, the potential synthesis, the unification of ancient wisdom and modern science.
That really feels like the ultimate aim, doesn't it? This proposed new science isn't about throwing out physics and replacing it with mysticism, not at all. It's about rigorously investigating whether there's an objective physical reality, specifically an electromagnetic reality, underlying phenomena that have been subjectively experienced, described, and worked with in non-scientific languages and frameworks for millennia.
Things like auras, chi, prana, chakras, the power of intention or spirit. Maybe even extending to more controversial areas like telepathy, remote viewing, distant healing.
Exactly. The proposal is that these aren't necessarily supernatural or outside the bounds of physics. Instead, they might be aspects of the body's complex electromagnetic nature and its subtle interactions with the environment and potentially with other EM fields, including those of other living beings.
So the idea is that traditional energy medicine systems, for instance, weren't fundamentally wrong in their observations. They just lacked the specific scientific framework, the language, and crucially the technological tools to objectively study and measure what they were intuitively perceiving and interacting with.
That seems to be the core argument. They perceived real phenomena, subtle shifts, flows, and blockages in the body's energy field, correlated with health and illness, but described them using the concepts and metaphors available within their cultures and times. This new science aims to provide the unifying theory, spirit as EM field, the necessary sensitive instrumentation, like high-impedance electrodes, and the ultimate mapping tool, the whole-body EM scanner, to finally bring these phenomena fully into the realm of empirical, testable, objective science.
It suggests that the dominant reductionist scientific method, while incredibly powerful and successful within its defined domain, maybe hit a kind of limit. It couldn't easily perceive or explain phenomena that weren't readily reducible to purely mechanical, inanimate parts, or phenomena that were perhaps too subtle, too holistic, or too intertwined with subjective experience for its existing tools and assumptions.
It proposes that reductionism, while valid and essential, might only provide a complete picture over a limited, though large, range of reality. Expanding our tools, our measurement capabilities, and our fundamental theoretical framework to include the electromagnetic field as central to life and consciousness, as this new science suggests, could reveal a much richer, more interconnected, and ultimately unified picture of the universe, one where mind and matter, science and spirit, are not separate domains, but integrated aspects of a single reality.
And the potential applications, the sheer range of things we might discover or be able to do if this framework proves fruitful, it really is awe-inspiring when you think about it. If we really are like biological cell phones, what kinds of information are we constantly broadcasting and receiving, perhaps mostly unconsciously, that we're currently completely deaf and blind to?
Could we, as the sources speculatively suggest, eventually develop instruments sensitive enough to detect the lingering EM trace signatures of people who were intensely present in a particular location days or even longer ago, potentially lending a scientific basis to the claims of some traditional trackers or psychics?
Could we design experiments to objectively measure the EM field generated during focused prayer or collective intention and see if it has a statistically significant effect on biological systems like seed germination rates or wound healing, finally testing these deeply held beliefs empirically?
Can we, with a technology like the proposed scanner, literally map and study the human spirit not as an abstract philosophical concept, but as a dynamic, complex, measurable physical field unique to each individual, changing with their thoughts, emotions, health, and interactions?
That's the audacious, almost unbelievable possibility presented here. To move from a scientific worldview where spirit is often ignored or actively dismissed, to one where understanding the physical nature of spirit becomes a fundamental problem in biology and physics, ripe for exploration, discovery, and maybe even technological application.
It fundamentally challenges our deepest assumptions about what is real, what is possible, and ultimately what it means to be human, living, conscious beings in this universe. It suggests the cosmos isn't a cold, dead, random mechanism, but potentially a vibrant, interconnected field where consciousness is not some bizarre fluke or epiphenomenon, but perhaps a fundamental property of matter itself, expressed most complexly in life.
It compels us, really, to reconsider phenomena we've maybe too easily dismissed as purely subjective, superstitious, or woo-woo, and ask the rigorous scientific question. Is there physics here? Is there an electromagnetic reality here that we simply haven't understood or had the tools to measure until now? Wow. Okay, we went from questioning the foundations of reality to talking about potentially scanning your soul, or at least its proposed physical basis, as a dynamic electromagnetic field. That was quite a journey.
It truly was. This deep dive into the proposed science of human energy fields, based on the sources we looked at, definitely opens the door to a potentially revolutionary way of seeing the universe. One where spirit isn't separate from matter, but perhaps inherent within it, offering a potential framework to explore phenomena previously relegated to the mystical or paranormal through the rigorous lens of testable empirical science.
And the key takeaway, the really exciting part for me, is that this isn't just presented as philosophical musing or untestable speculation. It aims to generate concrete, specific, falsifiable predictions and calls for the development of entirely new kinds of scientific instruments and technology.
Right. Tools that could allow us to investigate consciousness, health, human potential, and our connection to the world in ways that we've previously only been able to dream about, or perhaps access through subjective experience alone.
It's really about building the tools and refining the theory to finally try and bridge that age-old gap between subjective inner experience and objective outer measurement. If successful, it could potentially unlock profound secrets about ourselves and the universe that have been hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to develop the eyes, or rather the sensors, to see them. Which leaves us, and you, with this final thought to ponder. If our bodies truly are constantly emitting and receiving complex electromagnetic signals, streams of information that might be subtly influencing our health, shaping our moods, connecting us to our environment, and perhaps even linking us to each other in ways we don't consciously perceive, What immense dimension of reality, what incredible layer of communication and connection are we currently missing out on simply because our prevailing scientific framework hasn't acknowledged or equipped us to perceive it?
What connections, what potentials for healing, understanding, and interaction become possible in this unified field if we learn how to sense it, map it, and maybe even consciously engage with it?
How might truly understanding our own electromagnetic nature fundamentally change everything we think we know about consciousness, about health, about life itself, and about our vibrant, dynamic, and deeply interconnected place within the cosmos?
It suggests the grand adventure of scientific discovery is far, far from over, and perhaps some of the most profound discoveries still ahead lie precisely in tackling the nature of spirit, not as metaphysics, but as a deep and fundamental problem of physics.
Indeed, a mind-bending place to leave it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into some truly paradigm-shifting ideas. We'll see you next time.